Imagine holding the largest fortune in the history of the world and still going bankrupt. Not once, not twice, but 14 times. And that is exactly what happened to the Spanish Empire. For 2 centuries, Spain controlled more gold and silver than any civilization before it. Their ships crossed oceans loaded with treasure. Their kings commanded armies that made Europe tremble. At its peak, the Spanish Empire spanned 4 continents, governed over 50 million people, and processed nearly 80% of the world's silver supply. And yet by the early 19th century, it was gone. The empire fractured, the treasury was empty, the influence evaporated. And historians still argue about the exact moment Spain signed its own financial death warrant. But there was one trade, one structural decision made not in a palace, but in the cold logic of desperation. A decision that transformed 2 centuries of extracted wealth into a debt spiral so severe, no amount of silver could ever climb out of it. This is the story of how the richest empire in human history broke itself. To understand the fall, you have to first feel the scale of the rise. In 1492, Christopher Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean under the Spanish crown. Within 30 years, the conquistadors, Hernán Cortés in Mexico, Francisco Pizarro in Peru, had dismantled 2 of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas and begun the most aggressive extraction of natural resources the world had ever seen. The silver mines of Potosí in modern-day Bolivia were discovered in 1545. At their peak, they produced roughly 60% of all the silver circulating on Earth. Tens of thousands of indigenous laborers under the brutal forced labor system called the Mita descended into those mountains and didn't always come back up. The silver that came out, however, crossed the Atlantic by the shipload. Between 1,500 and 1,800, Spain extracted an estimated 150,000 tons of silver from the Americas. If you stacked it, it would be taller than the Eiffel Tower many times over. In today's value, we're talking about wealth measured in trillions. Spain's kings used this money to fund wars, to build cathedrals, to project power across Europe, fighting the Ottomans, the Dutch, the English, the French, sometimes all at once. King Philip II alone fought wars on 4 simultaneous fronts. The empire was not just rich, it was militarily addicted to its own wealth. And that addiction was the quiet trap being set. Here is what most people miss about the Spanish silver boom. Almost none of it stayed in Spain. The moment treasure ships docked at Seville, the gold and silver was already spoken for, not by builders, not by manufacturers, not by innovators. It was earmarked for bankers, specifically the Fugger banking dynasty of Germany, and later a rotating caste of Genoese financiers who had lent Spain money in advance against the promise of future silver deliveries. Spain had developed a financial instrument called the Asiento, essentially a contract that gave foreign creditors first claim on incoming treasure. Before the silver ever touched Spanish soil in any meaningful economic sense, it was already flowing outward to pay yesterday's debts. This is the first major turning point. Spain was not building wealth. Spain was using incoming cash to service outgoing obligations. The empire was, in modern terms, living on a credit card funded by a mine and spending faster than the mine could produce. Meanwhile, the flood of silver caused something economists now recognize as one of the earliest recorded cases of hyperinflation. Prices across Spain doubled, then tripled over the 16th century. Ordinary Spanish workers and merchants found their purchasing power collapsing even as their empire grew richer on paper. Local industry couldn't compete. Manufacturing declined. Spain became a country that extracted raw wealth but bought finished goods from the very European nations it was trying to dominate. The empire was getting bigger and hollower. By the reign of Philip II in the latter half of the 16th century, the tension had become impossible to ignore. Philip inherited the most powerful empire on earth and also its most complex financial web. He needed money for the Italian wars, money to suppress the Dutch revolt, money to build the Armada that would, he believed, finally crush Protestant England and restore Catholic dominance over Europe. In 1556, just 2 years into his reign, Philip did something shocking. He declared bankruptcy. The Spanish crown defaulted on its debts, restructuring obligations with its Genoese creditors in a move that sent tremors through European financial markets. And then he borrowed again. This is the pattern that defines Spain's financial tragedy. Default, renegotiate, borrow, spend, default again. Philip II declared sovereign bankruptcy 4 times during his reign in 1556, 1560, 1575, and 1596. Each time, creditors accepted restructured terms because the alternative, losing access to silverback Spain, was worse. But each restructuring came with a price: higher interest rates, more aggressive Asiento arrangements, greater shares of future silver pledged in advance. Spain was not just borrowing against its future, it was selling it piece by piece at increasingly unfavorable terms. Then came 1588, the Spanish Armada, 130 ships, 30,000 men, the greatest naval force Spain had ever assembled, sailed toward England. It was meant to be the decisive blow, the moment Spain's military and financial investment paid off in total European dominance. You know how it ended: storms, English tactics, a catastrophic defeat. The Armada's destruction didn't just cost Spain ships and men. It cost Spain the psychological aura of invincibility that had kept creditors lending and rivals hesitating. The empire was suddenly visible as something it had always been beneath the surface: overextended, over-indebted, and deeply fragile. The 17th century brought no relief. Spain continued its wars, continued its borrowing, continued its defaults. But now, something more dangerous was happening underground, literally. The silver mines of Potosí were beginning to run dry. Output peaked around 1590 and began a long, slow decline. The ore deposits that were easiest to reach had been exhausted. Deeper mining required more labor, more cost, more infrastructure, and produced less. The revenue model that the entire empire had been built on was quietly collapsing. At the same time, Spain's European rivals, the Dutch, the English, the French, had been watching and learning. While Spain extracted and spent, they built. The Dutch created joint stock companies and the world's first modern stock exchange. The English developed a banking system that could mobilize private capital at scale. These nations were industrializing their economies. Spain was still running a medieval extraction model in a world that was moving beyond it. By the early 18th century, the War of the Spanish Succession had drained what remained. Spain lost its European territories, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, in the peace settlements. And when the Latin American independence movements swept through the early 19th century, colony by colony breaking free, the silver pipeline didn't slow down. It stopped entirely. There was no empire left to bankrupt. It had already been spent. Spain's story did not end in one catastrophic moment. There was no single battle, no single bad harvest, no single reckless king who caused the fall. That's what makes it so haunting. The empire collapsed under the weight of 200 years of structural choices, each one individually rational, collectively ruinous. Borrow to project power, pledge future revenue to fund present wars. Extract rather than build. Expand the empire's size while hollowing out its economic foundation. The richest civilization in the world became poor not by losing its gold. It became poor by never truly owning it. Here is what that means for you, watching this in the 21st century. Wealth that flows through you is not the same as wealth that stays with you. Spain had more money pass through its hands than any nation in history, and it built almost nothing with it. No enduring industrial base, no technological advantage, no self-sustaining economy. It consumed its future in installments, always believing the next shipment of silver would make everything right. The empires and the individuals who survive are not always the ones with the most resources. They are the ones who understand the difference between income and wealth, between power and sustainability, between having money and knowing what money is for. Spain had all the gold in the world, and it spent every last coin trying to stay in a war it could never afford to win.